All right, we now welcome onto the podcast, Mike Brumley. Mike, thanks for coming on today.
Thank you so much. Really, I'm happy to be on the show.
So I've been following you for a while, just online. I don't even think you run the Instagram account or anything like that, but I see a lot of the things that you guys have been putting out online, specifically on Instagram and and just looking you up. You've been in, geez, I think you said before we started recording, professional baseball for over 40 years. So I think anytime I can interview somebody who has that much experience in baseball, and I've been lucky enough to be able to interview several people who have
Right.
had I always want to take that opportunity because there's always something to learn from somebody who has so many more years of doing the same thing that
Right.
selfishly I'm doing, right? Because I'm trying to get better as a coach, and I know everybody who's listening, gonna listen or watch this, it's the same thing. Um,
Yeah.
you have a ton of experience, right? What let me tee this off this way. When you're working with, because I know you work with a ton of major league players right now, and you work with minor leaguers, but even some high school players too. What are the big differences between when you're working with a high school player versus a major league player? Like I have some thoughts on my own, but I want to hear what your take is on that.
Uh, and principally speaking, it doesn't change, and I'm already, I've got two grandkids that are, 6 and 8, and I'm like going to watch these games and, what they do from a setup stand. I mean, it's real, like you put them in a better setup, things are going to happen. So, man, that's what's hitting is number one, super emotional, right? It's a personal part of the game. I mean, there's no, we only got 5 hits. It's like you either got hits or you didn't. I mean, and it's amazing to me. This is what drew me into hitting full time after doing a lot of stuff in the game. Like I said, I've been in 41 years. That was 14 as a player. Everything else has been in player development. I've managed at every level. I've coached, base running. I've coached outfield play. I've coached infield play. I've coached, and then I managed the 7 years in the minor leagues at every level. So there's just this experience that I'm coming out of. But hitting, I got to that point. I'm like, this is the hit or miss for everybody. This is what kicks people out of the game unless they go to be a PO, which that saves a lot of careers, right? So, but hitting is it. That's the eliminator. Like you hit or you don't. So, and that gets you out of high school. You don't make the team. That gets you out of college. It gets you out of A ball, double A, triple A, big. Eventually, as a big leaguer, your talent level is old and beat up, and you just can't do it anymore, and so it's out because you can't hit. So that's a huge draw for me, and that's and that part of it, is a big deal. So high school wise, to me, because of their lack of experience, but yet, man, these good high school players, they'll go to a showcase or something, an event, and they're like, yeah, I faced, a guy was throwing 92 to 94 the second day I was there. And then we faced a lefty who was 85 to 88, but nasty sink and a hard curve. So it's like that stuff is there. It's playing out what they have to do. And so I try to develop. The hardest thing about high school teaching to me is these guys will play a Tuesday game in Texas, let's say, against maybe a conference or maybe out of conference game, and they're going to face a guy throwing 78 to 82. Now they go on the weekend series and play the Friday, and they face the Friday night guy who's already signed to go to Texas or OU or TCU or and he's said 91, 94. So, man, that's in the same week, so they have a real challenge. And so it's like, I try to coach them a little bit more about let's have our A swing or our A approach, and then let's adjust down to the guy who's 78 to 81. So let's don't, instead of vice versa. I'm going to kill the 80-mile-an-hour guy, and then I'm going to have to make some adjustments on the weekend because this guy's throwing 90 plus. Let's have 90 plus be your baseline of how you move, and then let's adjust to the real soft. And which means, hey, it may be crowding the plate a little bit. It may be, I think there's certain things you can do. Hunting certain heights, I think, helps against a guy who's a good quality pitcher, but he doesn't have the velocity that you see. He's not being recruited all over the world, but the guy's going to be 10-1 in high school. You know what I mean? And those guys win games. And I've had some really good pro prospect high school kids that are hitting the good guy on the weekend, and then 0 for 4 against and he's like, he was throwing too slow to hit almost, and I'm like, hey, your team needs you to produce because you're hitting third in that lineup. Don't have the excuse of, well, he's throwing so soft, I couldn't stay back, or I couldn't, I just popped up, or, this umpire was helping him out because I get it. All that stuff's real,
Yeah.
you know, but I coach the mental side differently maybe than I do the pro. But the technique wise of understanding how you move, getting connected to the body, understanding math, and all those things. And then they've been really good in the past, right? As a junior high player, sixth grade, seventh, because they've had great hands, they've had great speed, and so they've dominated at those lower levels. But they're facing, select and all that. But now all of a sudden you go out to the high school team and you're like, man, that technique now is not working as good. Right. Now all of a sudden, man, you got a chance to make the varsity as a sophomore. And it's like, man, when I started facing guys like that, I needed to make adjustment. So I get parents, I think, that come to me and saying we've been really successful in junior high, and he loves to play, and he's a baseball player in heart, right? But we're reaching a level of play that's starting to challenge where he is physically and what he does mentally, and how do I help? So I think bringing somebody like me in, and then if I ever work with a younger player, like, to me younger is 13, 14, 15, then I'm like, okay, let's, can I help you get to a point that you can go compete when you go try to make that high school team? And that's a big thrill for me, even from a coaching standpoint. I mean, if Kyle Seeger, calls me and says, "You're not going to believe this," I was very happy and very satisfied that I had been a big part of his career. But I've also had that parent who he got cut as a ninth grader, played summer ball, going to go back out for the high school team as a sophomore because he just loves baseball. And I was involved in this adjustment. They call me back and they're like, "Hey, Jimmy made the JV, like he made the team." And so, I'm like, okay, I'm just as thrilled, I'm like, great. So that's been kind of a different way I get to experience a lot of different levels of successes.
Yeah, a lot to unpack there. I think one of the things that I've heard too, time and time again, is the slow pitching, right? Of like, man, I can't hit slow pitching. I struggle against slow
Right.
pitching. And I think
Right.
the biggest thing that I've seen and believe it is just it's expectations, right? Because you're facing a slow pitcher, he's not very good. You should, but that's the thing. You tell yourself you should be
Yeah.
hitting off of him. And so when you don't, then you start getting frustrated and down on
Yeah.
yourself. So
You're
what I
right.
tell a lot of kids is like you have to lower your own personal expectations when you're
Right.
facing a bad pitcher, because if
That's
not,
good.
I don't care if you're Mike Trout, you're going to roll over every once in a while against even a bad pitcher.
Correct.
And so I think that's something that, a lot of kids I see struggle with. Now, I think
That's a good
on
point.
the flip side of it is and this is something that again I see so much from high school kids. They're up there, they're trying to do so much, and it's because they a lot of times they haven't defined what is success as a hitter. They think getting
Right.
hits is success, and and that's just, and I try to teach these kids to stay away from being outcome based,
For sure.
because if you're solely out, you're going to be on a roller coaster ride. I'm sure you know that more than I do
Uh,
times 10.
yeah.
How do you go about helping players at any level be more process based? And I know that's very hard because
Yeah.
we're all guilty of it,
Yeah.
right? But
Mm.
is that something that first of all you believe in, and then secondly, like how do you go about helping
Mm.
players buy into the be it more process mindset versus outcome?
Hmm. Hmm. I came up with an idea. This is when I was with Atlanta, and it was like, how do I judge an at bat? Success or fail, not necessarily the hit, right? And so I came up with this criteria that judged your at bat, and it was like, and I broke it down into two different ways to judge. So if you were playing in the Brave organization, and we're playing Montgomery, which is the Tampa Bay Rays, and I had the organization identify for me if we were going to make a trade with the Tampa Bay Rays tomorrow, which pitchers off the Montgomery team would we want to trade for? Right. And this is double A.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say, they call me back and they say they got 3 guys on that Montgomery team. One of them's their starter, there's a reliever, and then there's a left-handed bullpen piece that we would like to have if we got in a trade with them. So that means to me, these guys are 1s and 2s, what I judge 1s and 2s. These are the big dogs in that organization that are going to be potential major leaguers. Now, so that one guy is going to pitch on Monday night or Tuesday night, but we're going to face the Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night guys are guys that we wouldn't want to trade for. So they're more average stuff, or they're more average, whatever they are. So I didn't judge the bats against those guys as the same as I did the guys we wanted to trade for. Right. So the guy we want to trade for, if I take him into a deep count and he strikes me out, or I put a ball in play, that's a heck of an at bat. Now, if I get a hit off of that number 1 guy, and maybe I got an 87 mile an hour line drive over the second baseman's head that went out at 19-degree launch angle, but it's only 87 miles an hour, which is not the grade of a hard hit ball at that pro level is 95. So that's well below what we deem as a hard hit ball. But that's a great at bat because you faced a real quality pitcher. You took him into a deep count. You swung at a strike, which you got a point for in my system, and your launch angle was 18, which I'm going to give you a point for. But the exit velocity, you're not getting a point for that because we're got to have 95 plus. But because of the launch angle and because of who you're facing, that's a successful at bat. Now you're facing those lesser guys. We're looking at barrels. How many balls are you really driving off a guy that you should drive? So now that grading system was different. So it was then it was back to getting a strike. And then I had 1 point in there for some kind of executional of this at the time. Man on third, less than 2 outs. There's not a lot of, when I played man on second, nobody out was a really big deal about hitting the ball to the right side, at least advance the runner. But you were looking to set up your teammate on deck to drive the run in. Today, I don't see it as much. You'll see a lot of bullets hit right to the third baseman, man on second, nobody out. Analytically, I think we've decided that, taking the bat out of the guy's hand by having him go the other way may not be beneficial. And even when I managed, if I had the guy on deck was like 1 for his last 20, and I got a guy who's, 5 for his last 15, then I might say, hey, let's hit. I don't want you to get him over. I want you to try to drive him in because your boy on deck is just not doing it and he's having a hard time. So I don't want to put it on him. I want him to have a free at bat. So, there's times where how you manage hitters, right, lineup wise, same thing from an amateur level, is I'm like, well, let's set up our lineup to score every inning, as opposed to let's put the first 4 best hitters up 1, 2, 3, 4, and then let's just pray for the last 5 guys to do something. Where I was like, all right, let's mix up, let's stagger some guys in there where we have a chance to score all the time. So that's kind of philosophy wise. But the grading system helped because same thing. Let's say you and I are in high A ball. This is talking about pro, and you're hitting 301, and I'm hitting 286. But when I looked at that grading system, I go, man, that guy hitting 280 actually has better at bats against quality pitching than the kid is hitting 307. Now, so we're talking about sending one of you guys to double A. Well, which pitchers are going to double A? All those 1s and 2s that you faced in A ball. So if you didn't have success against the 1s and 2s in A ball, those are the guys that are filtering into double A. Now, all of a sudden you get to that double A, you're facing 5 or 6 guys out of a 12-man staff that are considered a 1 or 2 possible. So I'm like, okay, well, who's hitting the best? The guy that's hitting 300, the guy hitting 280 against quality pitching. Mm-hmm. And so that, so there was another way of grading to say this might be the better guy to move up right now because he's handling quality pitching better than this other guy. So that was kind of interesting to look at it. When I got out the organization, guys were like, kind of cocked their head sideways and being like, man, that sort of makes sense, but I've never heard anybody doing it.
Yeah.
And so again, goes back to how am I grading my at bat? So a lot of times it's like, how many balls did, let's say you get a -1 for every 2 balls you chase out of the strike zone. Okay, well, there's that. But you get a positive for putting a strike in play. Okay, there's that. How many strikes did you take to get to the count that you got to? Okay, that may be something we issue. So I'm all of a sudden, I'm like, man, he's just letting them get that first strike in there and then going to work. It's like, okay, well, there's an umpire back there that's sometimes they're not having a great day, or he's got a big zone because he wants to keep the game going. I mean, I'm convinced at the major league level, this 2.5 hour mark, I think they've preached so much to these umpires because they want the speed of play. I think all of a sudden, man, they're losing sometimes the strike zone because they want to keep the game moving because they don't want the commissioner being like, well, every time you're behind the plate, it's a 3.5 hour game, half to 2:45, because that's what we're marketing today. Well, okay. Like, I don't know the answers, but I certainly, as far as my observation towards some of this, I go, they're trying to speed the game up. And unfortunately, you speed the game up against a guy who's throwing, 96 to 100 with decent command and hard break. Man, you're really putting hitters in a tough spot to even be productive.
How would
But
you
go
go
back,
about helping
go,
players game plan? I think game plan, especially at the professional or the major league level, that's, I mean, we'll get
that's
into some
huge.
mechanical stuff, later on. But I mean, how would you go about helping players game plan?
The game planning, I think, is a very valuable part of the game at every level. And I've got 3 or 4 coaches, high school coaches, that I'm kind of in their inner circle.
Mhm.
So they're the guys that I talk to about the amateur game, right? Because they're living it. And so I ask a lot of questions. And you go back to, how I want to mentor myself, or how I believe I need one guy in my life who's older than me. And then I need another guy in my life that's kind of going through the same thing. And then I need a couple of young guys that are giving me a different perspective that I'm not privy to. So I can learn from a lot of different levels. And I like having the guy that's older than me. So for me, those guys that are in their mid to upper 60s that have experienced the game, who have the mind that wants to work, and they're not caught into, well, this is what's always worked, because that's the kiss of death in our game today. But these older guys who are keeping this progressive mind, I'm like, how do you apply to that conversation you had with Willie Mays, in camp 1969? You know what I mean? So it's interesting to me. Like, I've talked to guys like that, and they're like, oh yeah, Willie Mays said one time, he goes, what's your game plan? He goes, what's his best pitch? Oh, his curveball. He goes, well, I'm looking on curveball because I'm Willie Mays, and that pitcher is going to throw his best pitch to Willie Mays. So I might as well bet on it. Like, it makes total sense. It's like, okay, his best pitch is a belt high fastball in on the hands. Okay, that's what you're going to get. And they've got all this film. I mean, if your TCU's playing Baylor next week, they can go watch all 3 starters pitch his last game, and they can look exactly what he was doing. So I think there's advantage to more information. But okay, so on a high school level, I've asked these high school coaches, and I've learned a lot from some of these high school guys that are just great coaches. And I'm like, all right, what do you do about, okay, you're going in and facing, because this was just like we talked about. You're going over and playing a district game, and their ace is a left-handed kid that's 78 to 80. And all of a sudden you're like, well, how do I get my team ready? Because that, like you said, that excuse of he's throwing too slow. No, we're in a district game, and it's a double elimination to get the regionals. We got to win this game. There's no excuse. Well, he's feeling too soft, right? So I asked these guys I go, what do you guys do? How do you prepare your teams in these situations? And then they come back to me and be like, okay, how do you see it? I see height a lot. Like, I want to sit on a certain height. And so I watch guys, if I had film, or even watching a guy warm up in the bullpen, you're like, he's throwing a 2-seamer, a slider, and a changeup, or I'm going to get to see it in the first inning or two, or what he's got. And I'm like, this is where he's commanding the ball. He's got a 2-seamer and slider. He's trying to throw this window for strikes. So I'm like, set on the height that he's comfortable with. So now the early on, the first time I ever tried to use analytics, this was back in my Seattle days when I was helping out with the hitting, even though I was the first base coach and I was doing base run outfield or whatever I was doing. So I was kind of in that world. And I said, okay, crap, man. And he's a Cy Young, and we got a young team in Seattle. Like, what am I going to tell these guys? 'Cause, half our team's never even seen him except on TV. You know what I mean? So it's like, okay, how do we go? So I pulled up Justin Verlander. This is the old Bats program where it had the 9 boxes, right? I don't know if you've ever saw that old program, but anyway, I could pull up his games, and I just basically I said I'm going to pull up every ball that was hit 95 or above against Justin Verlander, and I looked at all these boxes. There was one box, it's like 1.5 boxes that almost every hard contact was in this one area. Because everywhere else, inside corner, up and away, down, you're not going to get a hit on that because this stuff is too good. But for whatever reason, he had given up like 12 balls hit over 95, and I guarantee you, and 9 of them were in the same basic area. So I went to my young players, like, all right, here's the deal. Because they were like, what are we going to do? And I go, here's the deal. We're going to look in one window, in one spot. And if he doesn't throw it in that spot, do not swing. I said, now, in that little window, it could be a curveball. It could be a 2-seamer. It could be a 4-seamer. It could be a changeup. It could be a slider, but it's going to go in that window. And so we set on it. We beat them twice. And all we did was like, if you're going to make an out, make it out in this one spot. And so later on, when I was in Atlanta, we started introducing game planning to the younger players. I'm like, all right, guys, here's the window that he commands. This is where his stuff works. Let's see how many outs we can make in this window. That's it. Let's go play. And so all of a sudden, we win a game. And the first time I ever did it, this is true. First time I did it, we established this. This guy throws strikes, right? So let's just set on it and get him. So he threw 17. As a nine guys in the lineup, we swung at 17 pitches that were in that box because I evaluate the next day. The average exit velocity in those 17 swings was 99 miles an hour, right? Wow. Okay, every ball that was contacted outside of that circle exit velocity was 73 miles an hour. So the next day, I'm in A-ball. All the kids come to the cage, right? Because A-ball, that's how it is, right? The whole team goes and hits together. Now the higher you go, the more individual it gets. But, when you're in that college mode, it's like all the hitters are going to the cage. You know what I mean? So they all came down there and we won the game. They're like, man, Brum, that was unbelievable. Like we just swung in this one spot the entire game. And every time we did, we crushed it. Well, we had like 5 walks and we weren't trying to walk. We just weren't swinging other than this one spot. So he was going to what I call his trap areas. He was fire those trap areas in there. We just weren't swinging. And so all of a sudden, that became kind of the philosophy. And I go, okay, given what you guys experienced last night, do you want to swing in that window zone or out? I go 99 miles an hour or 73. And they're like, let's go, 99, So that was kind of a good introduction to isolating on a height or a window and just being, and that's kind of where my guys right now are just going through the playoffs in Texas. And I got a couple really good players, and they were going to face some really good pitching this weekend or this week. And so we talked about it, and we're like, dude, I've seen, I know this guy. And I go, here's where he's going to try to beat you. Here's where he's going to try to make you look bad. Let's be real aggressive in the area that he likes to throw that first or second strike. And so that became kind of it. Like, let's set in the area that we think he's going to command. Because, I've seen conversations, right? Okay, we're facing a hard sinker. Hey, get him up out over the plate. Well, what if he doesn't get up and out over the plate? What if he's commanding his sinker? Are we just going to be like, it's over? Or let's go like, where's he commanding it? Let's set in it. Let's set in where he wants to go and take it away from him. And so that his go-to strike, let's just take it away. We're ghetto hacking on that right there. Or, we're going to get after him a little bit. And so that kind of established. Now you got that soft toss and lefty, right? He's got 2-seamer away. He's got a nice little changeup. He kind of back puts that break on ball, but he'll also backdoor you. Okay, let's just set in what I call a high 3 window plate, right? The plate is actually 7 balls wide, but we're 3. They're still in a way, and they're a down, and they're still a up, even though we're looking in the middle of the plate, right? So that's where I think, from a coaching standpoint, you're like, well, we got to look away on this guy. Well, what does the way look like? Is it the corner? Is it one ball off the corner? Because that's what the umpire's calling. No, none of those pitches are drivable, right? So I want to bring the zone in a little bit. So I'm operating off the middle three, which I call line. Now, if you again go back to those three balls are in the middle of the plate, but they're still away, still in. And now, so basically, I've shrunk the strike zone down to three balls and kind of created that cylinder that we're talking about. And let's attack there. Because I said that. I was like, well, let's look for the ball in. Well, that's so general. Look for in. We looking in, middle, up. What's the spin? Is it going to be a four steamer? Is it going to be a two steamer? Is it going to be a cutter? Like, what's showing up in this window that we're talking about? So these I want to know, right? And I want to give the kids information and be like, so I take the pressure on and go, let's just make an out in this window. If you're going to get you out, let's do it right here. And all of a sudden we're in better count and we're doing things that, and everybody's in it. I had a conversation with a big time manager this year, one of the first division managers right now. And we talked about this. I said, hey, you're going into a game tomorrow. You got three guys that are on autopilot. Like, it don't matter what they're throwing, they're going to whack it. And then you got three guys in your lineup that are trending from coming off of a real good kind of stretch or coming off of a bad stretch and getting better. And then you got three guys that actually, if you really got down to it and you said, think you can get a hit tonight, they're like, no. Three guys in the lineup, they're like, I'm not sure I can get tonight because of, and we've all been there. And I've been in all three guys. I've been the autopilot guy with the ball look like a beach ball and you just whacking everything. I've been on the guy like, man, I just went, 5 for my last 10, but now I took 0 for 4 last night. So now which way am I trending? Because I was really good. Now I'm not so good. And then there's those guys who are like, dude, I'm 0-2 every time I go to the plate. That feeling, right? You're just 0-2. It's like you're standing like, oh, I might as well just be 0-2 from the beginning. But that's kind of where, when you start talking about preparation one.
So would you say for the coaches that, like, obviously at the major league level, you guys, you have the data, right? You have the data even at the college level too of the strengths and weaknesses of the pitcher. The high school level, the data isn't you don't get it as easy. So is this something that maybe like you have to wait until you see like the first, second inning and then you kind of game plan from there?
Yeah. I think in those high school situations, but I think in general, I know in the state of Texas, right? Because I had one of my coaches, I work with his son, and he's the head coach, but he has his boy's one of my clients. So he comes in and they're going to play the next night. So I'm like, well, tell me who you're facing, and he knew exactly, right? He said, I've seen this kid pitch 2 other times. Now his team hadn't faced the guy, but he saw him in a summer league game 2 years ago, last summer, and then he goes, this is what I saw him do. He's got a really good changeup. And, and they'll sit there and they'll call their buddy who played him last week and just be like, what'd you see from Johnson? It's like, well, he was still throwing that hard sinker. His changeup was really good late in the count. So, okay. So he's going to prepare his team a little bit better. Otherwise, like, watch the guy warm up. Is it 2-seam or is it 4-seam? Just to know what the movement is. And then it's like, well, and then all of a sudden you get in the game, glove side might cut a little bit. So it's like, man, he goes that glove side. It seems like it's cutting. When he goes middle to arm side, it seems like it's a more true fastball. So, just identifying those two things. And then my thing is the last two things I talk about is where does he really want to embarrass you and strike you out? That's the difference, I think, today, as everybody wants the high strikeouts because that's what's getting recruited. That's what's getting moved up to the next level. That's what has success in college. So there's a lot of things that are tied into them striking people out. I thought, I think during my career, probably half the guys wanted to strike everybody out. They play so much select, so many I like, have you ever faced so-and-so? He's like, yeah, I saw him last summer, da-da-da-da-da. So they might have seen him once or twice, most of the really good players. But that's definitely a challenge. But I think watching him his first couple innings and just paying it as a guy getting ready to play, and I'm out there playing catch with my buddy or I'm running my sprints, I'm watching that bullpen the entire time.
Yeah.
Like just and all of a sudden he bounces that slider a couple of times. I'm like, oh, okay. And he may be lights out with it, in the first inning, but like right now I'm going to get a little bit of picture of it.
Yeah, I got a few thoughts on that. First of all,
but then
I really like that philosophy. I think if you For really any hitter, if you try to hit everything, right, you end up hitting nothing. And so you need to have a more of that specific type of
Right.
plan that you're talking about, which I really like a lot.
No
I think for a lot of these kids, especially, I mean,
That's that's what's hard about facing that soft tosser, because every ball you think you can hit,
and yeah, exactly. Yep.
right? Because it's true. If I go out and throw UBP right now, I could scatter it all over the place, and you could put it in play. But then all of a sudden in a game, that's over 4,
Yep.
right?
So it's being okay with taking pitches and being patient. It's that aggressive patience, right? You have to have aggressive patience to be a very good hitter. Um, One of the things that I was I did some research on you, and I was told to ask you this is, do you have any contrarian takes on hitting mechanics? Do you have any takes on hitting mechanics that maybe are different from a lot of other hitting coaches or coaches across the country? Like, is there anything that you believe when it comes to mechanics that just a little bit different?
Uh, I mean, like I said, I've mentored. Let's say, I mean, Greg Walker was huge for me, right? Who's a special assistant in Atlanta. He's the one that got me the job in Atlanta. And so Greg Walker's been a major league hitting coach for 15 years, and had some real successful teams, had some World Series teams, played on some good teams. But he's also then he was connected to Craig Wallenbrock out of Southern California. That Craig's been working with hitters since the '70s. He's a little more mature in age right now, so he's seen a lot. So going and being introduced to him, by Raul Ibanez 7 or 8 years ago, and then you've got Brant Browns, and then you got guys out there that are have run in the same circles with some of this newness of applying the swing to today and what we're facing today. So and I'm really curious about a better way of teaching certain things. I think if you hear me speak, I think the one thing that would be might not be what you've always heard is I don't I don't worry a lot about rotating the lower half. I believe the lower half is more about stability and leverage than it is rotating. And it's like looking at golf mechanics, or let's say, and I thought this was interesting. There's a teaching pro out of Phoenix named Mike Malaska. Now, I haven't met this guy yet, but I want to, because I enjoy listening to people teach. I don't care what they're teaching. They might be teaching how to drive in a screw straight. I like listening to it. And so this guy's a real. I love how he teaches. But he talked about. He said he was on tour in the '70s. He said Jack Nicklaus was the greatest player in that whole for decades, really. And he said, well, I was on the tee box practice tee with Jack, and he said he had this just violent rotation and just crush balls. He goes, he was the first guy that was driving it 280, 290, when Trevino and Gary Player, they were all hitting 235, 240 right down the middle, where Jack was actually out driving them anyway. So he said, man, his hips were so fast, and da da. So he goes, Jack, can I ask you a question? He goes, how do you engage? When do you engage, like how hard you want to rotate your hips? He said, never in my life have I ever thought about rotating my hips to hit a golf ball. Now, if you watch the golf swing, it totally looks like that's all that it is hip rotation. And he said, but yet this premier player did not even address rotating his hips, getting force into a golf ball. So I was kind of the same thing. I was like, I don't think it's about the hip rotation as much as it is the stack, shoulders and hips stack, and the mass moving. So the newest thing that I've talked about, and I wasn't the only one, this has been a evolution of discussion, and we've come down to looking at the biomechanics of the body and being like, what part of the spine is truly responsible for rotation, right? What is it? T1 through 12. So the T spine in the middle of your back, and specifically T5 and T6 and T7, are tied to rotation. Now, if you take the psoas in the front of the body, in the groin area, you know where that I'm talking about. that transverses and ties to T6. So when you're talking about how do my hips tie to my back, there you go.
Mm.
And I've totally believed that for years, is that I believe that swinging from the back of the body, thinking about rotation from the back of the body, as opposed to using the front side of the body to direct the barrel. So that's where I'm probably a little different. I talk a lot about rotation from the back, but specifically the T-spine. And the T-spine is right. So I actually use a heart monitor that I ordered. So I put this heart monitor on players. Now in the backside, it's right in the middle of T5 and T6. But on the front side, it's right below your pecs. So belt line separates the lower half to the upper half. My belt line is here, is the T-spine. Is T5, T6 is in my mind is the belt line of separation when it comes to the lower half and upper body working. So I don't split the body at the belt. I split it from here. So now this right here is upper body. From here down is all lower half. So all this core, all this oblique, all this tie-in to me is lower half, which is connected to your hips. Now, your lower half, your weight, your hamstrings, your quads, your balance, like on your toe, all that stuff to me all ties to the lower half. So I talk a lot about rotation of T-spine. It's funny where, like I was listening, and I don't know Bregman at all, but I was listening to, he posted a bunch of stuff this winter, I think because his contract's up. I think he wants to show everybody how hard he works. But anyway, good for him. And so anyway, Bregman was saying, I don't want to think about rotation. And so what he meant was, and you watch the video, he's only rotating from here. He's really not trying to rotate his hips. So I said, well, I agree. But he wasn't saying, this is still rotating. But see, I can sit in a chair and rotate this. My hips are not moving at all, but I've got force. My question is this: how does what's the polo? How does the polo player throw a ball so hard when he's treading water? He's not grounded to the ground, but yet there's this super force of throwing. So I go back to like when we were kids, right? Playing tennis ball tag in the pool, and you could throw a ball like 90 and you're floating in the deep end. How are you creating that kind of force without ground connection? I'm still waiting for the total answer. I know how the body works. And so that's where, to me, Adam Duvall, when he came over from Cincinnati and we kind of rebuilt his swing, and he's had I said, Doobie, I want you to see how far you can rotate your upper body without moving your hips. And that clarity for him of understanding what true connection and separation was totally changed, like his perspective of what he was trying to do. And so, we worked a lot about, understand rotating from the T-spine and not trying to spin the hips or not trying to pop the hips. All that sway and all that false load and stuff that I see a lot. And guys are trying to create momentum into mass, but makes them very disconnected. And so the swing and miss is a lot higher because their swing decision has to happen a lot earlier. Well, I think we all know, like, that's a huge thing.
So first of all, that was phenomenal. I think you did a really good job explaining that right there. I've heard a lot of people in the past talk about loading, like getting into your back scap. I haven't heard as many people talk about the T-spine, which I love. Yeah. You're shaking your head. Why are you shaking your head?
Well, that scap load to me, because I evaluate the same thing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that was one of the early deals was scap load move. Okay, so scap load to me, here's the problem with scap load, the way they're teaching it, is if I had you on a pull down machine, right, on a cable, and I said, all right, let's do a cable pull, you wouldn't pull the elbows behind you. You would pull them in line with the body, right?
Right.
Because if you pull it behind, you're going to recruit your delts, and all of a sudden you're going to tear something in your shoulder.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, I just tore something in my bicep tendon, because of the technique that you're pulling behind. And when I pull the elbow behind, what's this doing? Forward. So this scap load, when guys start teaching about this scap load which is the lat loaded, right? But think about when you load scap and make this shoulder starts to come forward. Well, I don't want to create tension here because I want this shoulder to work underneath and through. You see exactly what you're feeling.
Yeah.
So that's where I disagreed with scap load as far as elbow scap moving behind me. Now, if you want to move scap load down, but I'm like, think more rib cage loading as opposed to scap.
Mm.
That's how I explain it. Again, it's one of those things I've taught a lot with the kettlebell, right? I love the kettlebell when you talk about kettlebell press. If I put a kettlebell in your hand and you pulled it up, right, and you flipped it over, this is what is holding the your elbow and your hip stack is what's holding the kettlebell for you to press it. You certainly can't get this out here, and you certainly can't press a kettlebell with your shoulder going forward. I mean, that hurts me. I know I'm old, but that hurts me without any weight in your setup. Just like if I was spotting you on the bench press, right? Before I pick it up and give you the bar, you kind of lock your rib cage in first, and then you take the bar off and press it. You don't try to catch that on the way, right? If you try to, you wouldn't be in this position forward and then try to catch that weight, you get crushed. So I like that prep of creating some tension in that kind of that rib cage area, where you kind of feel some tension there, which to me is kind of you're feeling that scap engaged, into your where it's going to tie into your T5 or T6 really.
Yeah,
So
I
that's
think
how I don't disagree in it. I just a different way of looking at it.
yeah, no, I know totally, and I think that's the first of all, I'm not a believer necessarily in it at all. It's just something that I've
Oh
heard
yeah.
many times, many times. I think the other thing that you hear a
Oh,
lot is
for sure.
loading in the back hip, loading the back. You hear that a lot. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
I think that's been, I think some of the downfall, let's go back to my career. Like the teaching when I was, this all of a sudden in I'd say late 80s, early 90s, separation started becoming the talk. Hands back, foot down, right? It was get the front foot down, get the hands back. That's separation. Now we're separate. Now we're separate. And then trying to gather and find some leverage back here ain't working. Like it's just not working in general. But then you had a couple guys that weren't doing it, but it looked like a Michael Young would be a great example of kind of getting his front foot down super early, and then how he leveraged, coming in, and he drove everything into right field primarily, unless it was something soft. And because I was with Texas, I mean, what a great hitter he was, But I'm saying that technique sort of. So that was the one that now the new generation of I think is being misinterpreted is hip load or stacking on that backside, hip hinge. I got to get hip hinge to get into, and I've worked with guys that were obsessed with hip hinge and hip load. And I finally just said, all right, the next two times I work I don't even want you to mention your hip. No, we're not even going to talk about it. So we started putting emphasis somewhere else. So on this one particular hitter, I switched it to the front side of the body because he was so concerned about his backside being in the right spot. I go, let's get the front side in the right spot and let's see what happens. So all of a sudden, we started getting some leverage on that front leg. The stack got cleaner. This front arm direction got better. And all of a sudden, they like, dude, I feel my back hip underneath me way better. I go, yeah, because we're not talking about it. That's like bat lag. I've had tons of guys that look at my hitters. They're like, dude, your guy's getting this unbelievable bat lag position. I go, you know why? Because we never talk about it. I never talk about bat lag. But my guys do it. When I look at the film, I show them the film. I'm like, you like where that bat lag is? They're like, yeah, it's perfect. I go, we don't talk about it.
Mm.
It's just not something it's a what I call non-teach. Right? So there's non-teaches in the swing. This is the danger of video analysis. There's non-teaches in there that we're trying to teach. I'm like, that's a non-teach. Like, don't even talk about it. It's going to happen on the net. If you get these other areas right, that's going to clean up on its own. So let's don't even add it to it. Everybody's like, well, how do you get? I go, okay, here's an example. If you're an outfielder or you're a third baseman, short, we're talking about four seaming a baseball across the diamond or throwing a guy out at home plate. Okay, a couple of things that aren't happening. One is you're not thinking about driving your back knee down to throw to the ball. That's one. Okay, so that I go, because I ask guys all the time, they're like, I want to feel that back knee going down into my stride. I go, do you feel it when you're throwing a ball to home plate or across the diamond? And they're like, no. I go, it's still there. It's working, right? Your lower half's working for you to throw 90 miles an hour across the infield, but are you thinking about driving your back hip and back knee down? They're like, no. I go, well, but it does. Well, yeah, it's a non-teach
I
to
love
me.
that.
So
Non-teach.
that's okay. So that's one part, right? So that other side of hip hinge is I don't want, my biggest thing with the back hip is I don't want it to sway. I don't want it to sway over the back heel. So if I see that weight getting over that back heel, you either got to reach with your front foot and now you're kind of feeling back trap, or you got to make this big push to get back to square. Now all of a sudden you're losing your backside, right? Your back heel's coming up, that anchor on the ground, you're not feeling. You're like, I don't feel anchored. I feel like I'm almost in the air when I'm hitting. And I'm like, exactly. So hip hinge to me, okay, so the way I kind of fix hip hinge or how I address it is I actually use a yoga towel. All right, so I lay this yoga towel down in the batting cage, and I'm like, I want you to try to rip the yoga towel in your setup. So if I put you on that yoga towel and I said, start trying to rip the towel, you're trying to move your feet. Now you're not moving, right? Because you got turf shoes on, let's say, but you're trying to create tension. So I said, you feel that tension as you're trying to move against that towel. I said, now, if I put a paper towel, a roll of paper, you should rip it easy, right? Because it's a paper towel. I said, but think about putting a towel on the ground and ripping that resistance. I call it, it's kind of the poor man's ground plates, right? Because it's going to test where the weight is. And you can't rip that towel if you're preset back or your back knee is in a compromised position, or you're trying to hip hinge, you can't create any leverage. And you'll feel it. You're like, well, I can't do it. I said, okay, now that you rip that towel, what I call ripping the towel, because you're creating tension in the lower half, which is you're engaging the right things I think you need to get. And if you stood up and if you went and got a beach towel out of your garage in there and laid it on the ground, said, okay, try to rip it in your setup, you would feel exactly what I'm saying. Now I said, okay, now let's try to rip it when you land your front foot. Try to rip it again. So now all of a sudden that front foot picks up and gets down on the ground. I said, now that resistance on the back, let's try to rip the towel again. And you're going to feel that ground force working against, which keeps you in the center. Now you're rotating around your head with that kind of force that's you're just working now, just T-spine rotation, because this is all connected to the T-spine. But you'll feel that ground resistance. And that's made a huge difference, because guys are like, wow, but I've always kind of used momentum to do it. And that's what most kids, right? Young kids who want to drive the ball, they create momentum to try to get more distance, and it's going to show up. It's so Happy Gilmore. Yeah, you're going to crush some balls. It's going to be super inconsistent. But when you do get it, you're going to get it good, because you create so much, almost like what I call timing contact, as opposed to, can I get in position to leverage it, And so for me, coming off of that determination with the young players, I said, listen, exit velocity and launch angle are real, but what's your goal? If I took all your last 20 balls you hit and the average exit velocities, now, if it's 105, 106, the launch angle can come up into the 20s, and you're going to be great. And you're going to hit a lot of balls in the gap, and you're going to hit some homers, but until that exit velocity matches, go be a good hitter with 85 exit velocity. Go get hits. As a ball player, you're going to be productive, even though your strength and maybe even your technique is not quite going to get you to 90 plus off the bat. Learn to be a good hitter there. And now all of a sudden that we start tying into and getting stronger, the exit velocity starts to come up. If it comes up, then we can let the launch angle come up. But otherwise, we need to keep it down. Let's just keep those low line drive technique ideas until the exit velocity starts to match. I mean, I want Austin Riley to hit a lot of balls 27 to 30 launch angle, because he can hit a lot of balls over 100, right? And if he catches a 105, 106 with 26 or 27, good chances something good's going to happen. But that, I had Vaughn Grissom in the minor leagues, and Vaughn was kind of that little skinny kid, signed out of high school, knows how to play, loves to play. He's like, Brum, when am I going to hit for power? And I'm like, And I named like 3 years, like 3 years in the future. Like he asked me that in like 2019. He goes, when am I going to hit for power? I go, probably 2022. And he's like, no. And I'm like, no, go be a good hitter. Go learn to be a good hitter. Which means exit velocity and launch angle need to match right now. Get those lines now. All of a sudden, man, you start getting that 100 going. Now we can start playing with a little more elevation. And we can teach you how to do it. It's not landing this way, just going to create it. It's shape. It's shape of what you do at the barrel and the mass to contact, right? My first prime example of that, Kyle Seager. Kyle was a great college hitter at North Carolina. Came to the minor leagues, great hitter, no power. Never hit homers. He didn't hit homers in high school. He didn't hit homers in college. He didn't hit homers in the minor leagues. So he comes up to Seattle. We're in a rebuild, right? And he's a good little player. And I'm like, Kyle, you can't stay in the big leagues at third base and not hit homers. I go, you're going to be up here for a minute, and then you're going to be back in the minor leagues. He's like, all right, what I need? I go, you got to hit homers. I go, we need to change how you work because I didn't have to teach that guy bat to ball skills. He had it, right? He just could hit, and all of a sudden, man, we start changing his cage work to create an elevation. He retired last year, 10 years in the big leagues, 25 homers a year for 10 years. So it was taught to him to do it. Now, I couldn't teach bat ball skills. I think that's hard to do. Now young age, I'm saying it's hard to do at 25. You know what I'm saying? I'm not also, if you swung and missed your whole life and you get the pro ball at 23, you're going to swing and miss a lot. I mean, it's just the way it is, And so, but I remember one time this happened to me in the big leagues. I think it was one year, either 89 or 90. I think I was the last guy in the American League to strike out. Like my first 77 at bats, I didn't have a strikeout. I was hitting 208. And I'm like, what does that matter? Putting in play ain't it either. You know what I mean? And I could really run. So it wasn't like, well, just hit it on the ground. You know what I mean? And the guys would tell me stuff like that, and I'd be like, no, man.
You're like, dude, I am. It doesn't matter. I am.
Exactly. I'm like, I haven't struck out in forever. I'm hitting 210. I'm gonna go. Maybe I'd rather strike out and hit 240. I don't know, but I mean, this ain't lining up. So for me, it's like, all my experience is good. So we basically taught Kyle to leverage the ball in the air a little bit, and it had to do with how he prepared every day. And then it had to do a little bit about what he was hunting in certain situations. And I was with him for like 7 years. And, like when I started game planning early for him, I'd be like, if you cannot get this ball in the air, don't swing. Like that was one, because he had a really good low line drive approach. I needed him to think more about getting the ball. And that's a little bit contact point and a little bit about shaping, what I call shaping the barrel.
Yeah, first of all, you had so many good phrases in there. I love the non-teach. I love that. Like there's certain parts of the swing non-teach. I also love the poor man's ground force, which I think is phenomenal with the towel. I'm definitely going to steal that. I think that's great.
It's unreal.
Yeah, I think stuff like that is like, that's what separates you from so many other people out there. It's like you're able to find different ways for hitters to feel, right? To feel, because that's so important, I think. And I think that's something you do a really good job of. I love those two for sure. Last question I have for you is, how do you watch video of hitters? And like, are there certain things you're looking for?
Yeah, I mean, okay. Number one is getting on the clock, right? If I'm working behind the clock, I'm already in trouble, right? Because then if I'm not on time on the clock, and that can mean a lot of different stuff. When I first went to Atlanta, I had 5 hitting coaches, and I would go in and I would see, I'd be like, well, how's Patrick doing? He's like, well, he's kind of late on the fastball and he's out front of off speed. I go, okay, where's he late? Well, he's hitting fastballs over the dugout and foul ball. I go, okay, where's he late? Right? I said, is it late on the start? Is it late getting on the ground? Is it late getting the barrel in position to launch from? Is it late out front where the contact point should be? Like there's a bunch of ways to be late. And so that's where I was a little different on let's find the spider and not try to clean up all the webs all the time. My dad taught me that lesson when I first started coaching. He said, "Hey, if I send you out in the garage and said, I want you to clean this garage," I said, "Every corner of this garage, there's a spider web." He goes, and you go in there and you spend an hour and clean it all up. But he goes, "What happens tomorrow if you don't find the spider?" He goes, "So it doesn't matter about going into the cage and fixing webs every day, because it's just going to show up the next day. You got to find the spider." So that's when I evaluate the hitting and I look at your move, and I'm looking at where you lose the clock, or where you lose your direction, or where you lose leverage. That's what I'm going to try to find. Once I can find that, now I'm getting at the spider. If I clean the spider, now all of a sudden you're not back trapped. Now all of a sudden you're not pulling off. Now all of a sudden you're not working underneath. Oh, now you're working over the top. Oh, you're smothering ground balls. Oh, now you're cutting ground. It's like those are all webs, right? That's all. And to go in there now, I'm not saying as a hitting coach in the middle of the year, because I hate the thought of duct taping a mistake, right? Because I can duct tape it, right? So I might say, like, let's just close your front foot off. Let's get you more clothes to see if you can, like I'm just trying to get you by tomorrow, or today's game. But if I'm working in the cage, or if I'm really establishing what you need to do and what I think is going to show up, what the spider really is, because I think everybody has two that go wrong. I think one's an upper body and it could be in the hands or in the arms. The other one's on the ground somewhere. So if I can find what those two are, and I set your drill set up to kind of address those two issues all the time. So you're not really addressing it up here. You're just going and executing. And that kind of cleans everything up. And that's kind of what I try to do. I said, let's just go execute your swing. I remember I had Chris Coughlin one time in Chicago, and he came in the cage. We played 17 day games in a row or something. He comes in, he's like, "Oh man," he goes, "I feel terrible." I go, "Good." I go, "Good for you." He goes, "What are you talking about?" I go, "I don't care how you feel. Go out and execute your swing. It don't matter how you feel." And he's like, "Dang, that's a good point." I go, it ain't about that. Go execute what you do well. So, and to me, when you're not moving well, you're not seeing it well, everything's kind of on top of you, then your approach or your plan needs to be way better. Now, if you're on autopilot and you're like, "Dude, if he lets this ball go, I'm going to hit it in the gap somewhere," and you kind of got that feeling going, then the approach, you don't even need an approach. I'd just be like, what would you tell that guy? I go, "Tell him what time the game starts." That's all. Like he's ready. Now, those other guys, and the worse you feel and the worse you're overmatched physically, the better your plan needs to be. I'd be guys, I go, "You're not going to get a hit off this guy at all unless he throws it in this one spot. But if he does, you got a chance to get a hit." So that's how I approach sometimes. I'm like, let's just get you in a position to be competitive, bro. Because it ain't right. It ain't feel good. We're working on it. You're working on it. Your parents are reminding you, your wife's called you, your dad's called you, your high school coach has called you. Like everybody's on board here, you know what I mean? But it just ain't happening. That's like I just had a conversation with Dansby Swanson this week, and he's like, "My numbers are like exit velocity and swing chase, and they're all good, but I'm hitting 215." So it's like, I know it's going to change. Like there's times where the law of averages is going to move for you, but let's help it. So let's find the spider, and let's find a drill, and let's find ideas that you can kind of fix that side of it, so you can kind of get that behind you. So you're not going in the cage searching for your swing. You're going and executing what you do. So that's what I'm saying. Go to the cage. Don't come in here looking for it. Don't come in here and be like, "Oh, bro, I need something." No, you don't. You know what's going on. It's just got away from you a little bit. Let's just get better in this area. So let's go better. Let's go shorter work with more intensity. Mm. I don't think you need to hit 150 balls. I said, let's hit 35 correctly and let's go play. And that's where I'm a big believer in that. I know I'm getting off on some stuff that we could talk about forever, but I believe in 3 routines. One of them is 8 to 9 minutes to get ready to play. The other one's 10 to 14 minutes, and the other one's 14 to 18 or 20 minutes. You're at home, you got all the time in the world. Practice starts at, you got a game at 7, you're out of school at 1:30. It's like you got all day to get ready. Now, but you're in that tournament game, you're playing the second game, there's no cage open. You guys are going to play catch, take infield, and play. How do you get ready? So you need to get some little 7-9 minute just mental routine to get you where you like, I'm ready. I've seen guys be like, I feel terrible if we don't get to take BP. Well, crap, dude, that's going to happen. So you can't just throw. Let's come up with something. Let's embrace the fact that we're not getting to take BP. Let's figure out a way to make it a positive for us, and being like, or just accept the negative. That's like a bad hitting background or bad umpire. Hey, it is what it is. What are we going to do about it? It ain't a matter of like, I'm just going to gripe about it every at bat. And then when I get in the car with my parents or my girlfriend, my wife, or my teammate, and being like, dude, that background's terrible. There's no way. Well, somebody got hits because we lost because we lost 8-2. It's like, so I'm big into just admitting what's going on and accept it, good, bad, or ugly, and just saying, okay, this is what that umpire's terrible. I had this conversation with Austin Riley one time. I said, Austin, if you were going into a major league game today, what would give you what you feel like is an advantage? And he goes, probably if I face the guy in the minor leagues. And that happens, right? Like Atlanta Braves and the Tampa Bay Rays, every level, they're in the exact same leagues at every level. So if you play against those Atlanta kids, and they play against each other from A ball to the big leagues. So he goes, well, probably if I've seen a guy a little bit in the minor leagues, I faced him in Double A or faced him in Triple A. I said, okay, so let's say you got that guy. He just got called up. You had a home run off of him in Gwinnett. You had another home run off of him in Mississippi in Double A the year before, and now he's pitching in the big league game against you. I go, you have an advantage? He goes, yeah. I said, now the first pitch of the game, slider off the plate, 2 balls off the plate, umpire calls a strike. I go, are you still in advantage? And he's like, no. He goes, now I'm back to even. I go, right. I go, you're exactly right. I go, now you're even. I said, what does even mean? Even means I got to get him in, I got to put a shape location that might not necessarily be double homer. I said, now you maintain that, you're in a double homer mindset for today, right? Get him in the right window because you've got some experience. You know what the breaking ball looks like. You know what his shape looks like. Yeah. Now you force him on the plate, right? And don't give in to the trap. Because a guy like that who's been hit hard, what are they going to do? They're going to throw you a slider off the plate or a high fastball. If you chase, now you're playing into their game plan. If you take it, now all of a sudden you change the game. That was a big thing. And we could talk about a lot of this stuff. It's about some of that, about that in-game preparation and how to treat the stat sheets and the people talking to you, right? That's a big thing about how do you respond to, because I went through that. My dad would call me and be like, what are you doing? How can you took that change, that fastball in that count, And so there's things that are pulling at you, and there's successes and there's pressures all along. Anybody who's good at this game, wants to play it at a high level, or wants to take it as far as they, and maybe that's just being a great high school player. Great. If you're an all district high school player and you go work for a living, good for you. You're going to enjoy life, and you'll be a good parent when your kids start playing, because you don't have all this built up anxiety or all this, negativity towards the game. You know what I mean? So,
That's awesome.
there's some things. Yeah.
That's so good. I tell you what, every once in a while, I mean, I've done over 350 of these episodes. Every once in a while, have a guest on the podcast where it's like, holy smokes, that was good. And today's episode was definitely a holy smokes moment for me. I was so good what you said. Just phenomenal. There's so many good cues, analogies, wisdom in this episode. I actually found out about you. I was watching an Instagram reel, I think, and I saw your Brum bands, like the bands you have your players. Can you talk about that? And then if people want those, because I think that's something I've started using too with some of my guys. Like, explain what that is, and then if people want to get them, like, where would they go to get them?
It's been huge. So I have a business partner that runs all my social media because it's just not my cup of tea. You know what I mean? And when I first started, and I met Clint, who's an incredible person, and he's in the middle of living the little league life. His kids playing, like he's in the middle of it. And he was an ex-player and played college, played pro ball, and anyway. So he and I developed this relationship, and I said, here's some ideas I have. I think we could really help the industry. I said, but my fear is that I come off looking like some guru on the film, and I don't want to do that. I said, so whatever we do is going to have to make a difference. I said, because if it doesn't, I don't want to be a part of it. I'm not looking for that side of it. I'm not looking to build my name. I'm looking to help players. And so that was kind of the motivation. So brumbands.com. opened this week. Like we just got up and running. We've been kind of running. We did a couple different things, but every product that we kind of came up with came out of my background of can I teach without verbalizing? Because I worked in South America, I worked in Taiwan. I had to work with a lot of players who didn't speak English or didn't speak very good English if they spoke any. Well, unfortunately, my Spanish is okay, poquito malo, but my Chinese is zero. Like I got no shot to now. I can throw out a few. I can count in Chinese. Anyway, so guess for BP, right? So the guys know how many rounds to take. So anyway, but we learned to develop a lot of these skills that you couldn't verbalize and teach it. And I think that's a frustrating thing for like I've had kids who played other sports, right? And I had a daughter that played college basketball, and I went to her shoot arounds and I ran her work. I don't know anything about basketball. I don't know anything about shooting, but I do know principles of balance and timing. And so I was able to coach basketball because of elements like that, right? It goes back to Lombardi, right? The great Vince Lombardi. His first coaching job, ninth grade girls basketball. What did he know about ninth grade girls basketball? He was just coming out of the NFL after being a great, and he was one of the 7 blocks of granite back in the day, right? I mean, it's a famous guy, but he could coach and he understood people. Is why he was able. He could just go coach basketball, girls basketball. There's no way he knew anything about it, but he won like city championship or something. So that's what I'm saying. That so this is why I developed it. Is I wanted to give tools to whether it's hey, there's times where like dad's not around or he's working hard. There's just times where time's limited. So I was like, I want to be able to help that kid who's working a little bit on his own, or his mom is taking him to practice, and dad's, hey, I went through that. I didn't get to see my kid practice a lot because I was working and I was traveling and I wasn't a great, little league dad because I wasn't there a lot, but I wanted to give even my own son things to work on when I was away. So these things, whether it was the cuff bands or the balls or the frisbees, I mean, there's a lot of things that you can do on your own that's going to self-teach, and it's going to get you in a place to do it. And I've experimented all this stuff. Like one of the new products is we built this towel bat, right? Which is just about, you can do it lead hand, front hand. I took my 6 and 8-year-old grandkids and I'm like, I want you to swing this a couple times. And they got in there. I didn't think one word. I didn't coach nothing. I said, I want you to get that. I want you to make that swoosh sound with the towel. I go, swing it where you can hear it. And I go, I want you to hear it right out in front of you, not over here behind you. So they just start swinging on their own. All of a sudden, I'm like, those are pretty good swings. So next day they're playing, and I'm standing there next to their mother, and she goes, "Why is his hands up so high?" Whatever it was, right? And I go, just wait. Just wait. All of a sudden, first pitch, boom, over the center fielder's head, and the first ball he's driven in the outfield. And, since the season, so I'm just saying there's things that some of these tools, it's just the same thing. Your kid can, the kid can go out, the hitter, the girl guy. I mean, we had great success with the softball too, the same way. And so the girls are right in there in the mix, when it comes to what I teach about hitting. I work with 2 girls. I taught them exact same as what I teach the guys, and they're good hitters. Anyway, so this was the motivation. I go, man, because there are so many things that are, I don't want to verbalize, because, man, that's like if I tell you, you don't want 3 things, 4 things going into your brain when you're up there trying to hit. So I was like, the band takes the thought out of it and gets you kind of that connective feel, because it's kind of like when I used to lift weights and when I had a trainer my last 7 years playing, and he could come over when I'm on a machine or I was doing a lift, and he could touch me, touch your lat or touch a part and be like, I want you to lift from there. And you could feel it. Once identified, I'm like, okay. Because before he's like, if the guy said, hey, keep those shoulders back, keep your lat engaged, keep your hips stacked, keep that weight on your back of your knees. All right, go lift. You're like, what? What did he just say? But if I went up and said, get this in position to move, you'd be like, all right, got it. And that's kind of what it is. The bands, the cuffs, the balls, the things that we're using, the towel bat, and now the thing I mentioned today is not on the set yet, which was the yoga mat on the ground. So that's something you got to go out and get yourself. But guys like you that are really involved in a lot of hitters, I think you're going to love it. Now, I think if you went out tomorrow and got on top of your yoga mat and just tried to rip it in your setup and rip, you'd be like, oh man, I see exactly what that's engaging. So brumbands.com, we got a couple of different varieties. He runs it, does a great job, of communicating with people that buy it. And when I got in there, when we first started doing it, I said, Clint, I don't want to hear anything. I don't want to hear good reports. I don't want to hear bad criticisms. I can't take it. Let's just, unless some coach, just comes out and says, man, we put all 15 of our guys involved, and that's happened. I've had like Division III coaches up in, Maine or Michigan saying, hey, we bought your stuff. We started applying it. Our guys love it. Da 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 da. So like the cuffs and all. I started out just having that stuff on my person, and I just started like having hitters put it on. If they were doing, I'd go, here, put these on, take a couple swings. So then I had guys come to me like, Brum, you got any more of those? I need to take a round. So anyway, this whole thing processed out. But every product builds on itself, and it kind of adds to. And then I've always believed that if I could give you, at least in my mind, 3 different options on how you get to launch position in a strong spot, I give you 3 options. I'm not sure which one the best. You're probably not even sure what the best is first. And then you do it a couple of times. You're like, this is what it feels like for me. And I'm like, great. Then that's you. And we're in the parameters of being a good hitter, even though there's some variety to it, right? Everybody's like, well, there's a lot of ways to skin the cat. No, principally not. Most great hitters, there's about 3 or 4 points in their swing that are almost identical. And you're just like, every good hitter does that. Now, how he does it, when he does it, what he thinks about, like say a Mike Trout. He said, yeah, I think about swinging down. What do you mean you think about? You don't swing down, not even close, but his idea was, when he got his back elbow slotted, that was down for him. Now, the barrel and the bat itself is not swinging down, but he wanted to feel like his back elbow was coming down into that. So swinging down for him is that move right there. Okay, how did I explain it, right? That's like, I'll say this last thing about Mookie Betts. Mookie Betts, this is my theory, and I've used this with a lot of different players. Mookie Betts has the highest exit velocity of anybody playing on a down and away fastball, which is out on the outside part of the plate, knee high. He has the highest exit velocity of anybody playing. Why? He's a 300 bowler. His body understands leverage in that position. That's what I believe. They don't teach him to hit the ball down and away like he does. His body motion, being a bowler, think about bowling. You're probably an amateur bowler just like me.
Oh, yeah.
Right? I bowl that 155. I'm happy as I can be, right? I bowl at 170 or 180. I'm on cloud 9, right? So, but think about bowling from just an athletic standpoint and not knowing. You never take a bowling lessons. I've never taken bowling lessons. I don't watch it a lot on TV. But you understand principally of how do I get this ball to roll where I'm looking? Like, how do I get it to roll on it? I bowl straight. I don't curve. I don't want to hurt my elbow, even though I'm not playing anymore. But I was always like, I'm not going to blow my elbow out bowling. So I'm a straight bowler, right? So now that all even lines up more because my hips have to clear and I've got to get extension with my bowling hand to keep it on line. That's exactly what Mookie does on that down away heater. His body leverage is in such a good position because and I always say this, if I use something that I don't have to teach you to do it. I just have to apply it to what we want to apply it to because you already know how to do it. I was like Austin Riley, really good golfer. There's a lot of times when I talk to him during the season, I'll use a golf analogy for him instead of a hitting analogy. And he's a hunter. So I've used duck hunting and what it's like to shoot passing shots, right? Left, right, duck going across. You've got to continue that motion. That's like driving the ball to right field. The barrel has to keep traveling into that gap after contact. It can't go, you know what I'm saying? So there's I love mixing in things like that. I've had basketball players talk. Dansby Swanson was a great high school basketball player. I've talked to him about what do your hips feel like? How square do you get to the plate coming off a screen to shoot 3-pointer? He knew exactly how to feel it. And I go, that's what we're talking about. That's what I'm talking about, that hip stack of staying under your shoulders. You don't shoot no free throw with your shoulders and your hips not stacked. There's not one on the side. I go, you can't line it up. You can't line up, and you're shooting it with your hands. But what if you got your alignment off? Could you still shoot it with your hands and maintain direction? Like, no. Okay. What are we trying to get at? Right. So, I mean, that's where I try to stack as much as I can about something you've experienced on yourself. You might have been a defensive back football player. You might have been a track star. You might have been soccer guy. You might have been I don't know. But if I can find something that applies to something you already know, I say, can we apply what you already know to hitting? If I can, I don't have to teach you nothing. Right. And you don't. So now you're like, oh, this is actually fun because I understand this. So that's kind of some of that stuff. But yeah, the brumbands.com just came. I met with Clint today. In fact, we did a new, we basically went through some of the new products and we basically demoed exactly how I use it. So I had a hitter today. We talked about, this is what I would do in this situation. You're a hand climber, or you're losing the barrel behind you, or you're collapsing underneath with your elbow, or your hips are sliding, or whatever it was. We kind of have addressed all these spiders in this set. Mm-hmm. And so I'm like, now I never use two items at the same time. Like, so I don't take, you got, let's say this product, the bag has 4 or 5 different things to use. I don't never double or triple them up or anything. I mean, I don't want it to look weird. Yeah. So I'm like, okay, what are we isolating on? You need your lead arm to stay connected to your chest. Okay, then that front band might be great. That cuff, that young player that wants to drop the barrel behind him and then let go with his top hand all the time. Okay, he needs to take BP with the cuffs every day for 3 or 4 days until he feels what it feels like to stack his hands through that contact. It's going to work. And then you got physio balls that kind of let you read position because it's all verbal for them and they can look in the mirror. There's a lot of things they can do. You just kind of, and I think the video we did today, some of the explanation on all, which is going to be part of that package. And Clint was like, man, let's send some true solid. And these aren't quips, like a 10-second quip just to get you interested in the product. It's like, we're going to give you something that actually how to apply it. And then once your son or daughter or whoever's playing with it can kind of feel it. And then they know when they go out to the garage or they're playing, in the tee before practice or whatever, they're doing something they can do. Cause I mean, practice, for coaches, like you got, 16 kids out there and 3 dads or 1 coach and 2 dads, whatever it is. Even as a good high school program, you got 3 coaches. The kids need to learn to work and benefit themselves without you having to watch every swing. And this kind of does help that.
Awesome.
For the older
Brumbands.com.
Yeah, it's man, and that's right. They're legit. I like I said, I was not going to do anything that I don't use and anything that doesn't apply to the major league guys that I have, and it filters down the other way. Because they're they're really tough on drills and and short bats. There's this judgment in there, right? I mean, everybody's got their opinions.
Well, Mike, this has been phenomenal, man. I really appreciate you coming on. We'll put the brumbands.com link in the show notes.
That's awesome.
Definitely check it out. But we gotta get you back on again. We'll pick another topic next time to dive into.
Yeah, dude, that'd be awesome. And you know what? I'd love to. I am planning on coming to Cincinnati at some point. And if I do, I'd love to sit down and go to lunch and talk about some things that are going on, and that'd be awesome.
Okay.